Severe, and I'm going to give a talk on 2 problems that we solved using renderless React components. So for a bit of background, the project we're working on is the Enhanced Reader. It's a page that gets PDFs, converts them to HTML, and then uses React and Redux to add enhancements that allow you to resize pages, rotate them, I don't know why. And we use a third-party library for converting the PDF, so we have very little control over the output HTML there. We end up with all these obscure classes which fix the content size. We don't want to touch any of that because it looks really confusing, so we decide if we want to size the PDF, we just use transform scale on the whole thing. But to know what scale to use, we rely on the browser width, which is only available on the client. So our first attempt at getting this was to do it in the component that's responsible for rendering each individual page of the PDF. In our component did mount, we check if it's the first page. If it is, we calculate what kind of width we want, and we set that scale using a Redux action. This wasn't very good in practice because it meant that we had to render twice, once with the wrong scale and then once again with the right one. So we had a bit of a workaround where in the Redux, in the render function, we check the scale, and if it's the default scale, we just return nothing. This wasn't really great because the component was complex enough already. It does an awful lot in terms of rendering, especially all the printing stuff I don't want to get into yet. So we thought we'd try something else. We created a component that just gets the client size. We called it Init. And it's got the component did mount that gets the default scale, which is used for rendering the page. Should component update? No, it shouldn't. And it just returns null. This worked a lot better. We didn't have to worry about rendering the page twice, so we could get rid of this little conditional in the render function, which was confusing for a lot of people. It's actually still there, but for a different reason. Okay, move on to another bug that we came across, where a user who clicked zoom would completely lose their place on the page. The problem was that the content was resizing, but the browser's scroll position was not changing with it. So here was our first attempt at workaround. We thought the zoom button, when you click on it, it could save the scroll position, and then when the scale then updates, it just adds that to the document, completely out of the way of React, really, just using the lifecycle. The problem with that was, well, for starters, you had to pass the scale into the zoom button, which it doesn't actually need for rendering, which is confusing. And also, there was a race condition where the component might not be completely mounted. So we had to wrap our set scroll top in set timeout, which makes me wince just thinking about it. So here was our second attempt. We used another renderless component. So when a user clicks on the zoom button, it still saves the scroll position, but it saves it somewhere that's accessible to other components. And then we've got this component that accesses it, that receives the scale, this one also doesn't use the scale for rendering, but it's a bit less confusing because you wouldn't expect it to render using the scale. It sets the scroll position when it updates, and it fixes the scroll position, so the users no longer lose their place. This is also good because there are loads of other functions that we use and props that could change that could cause a user to lose their place. And so we just pass them all in here, and it just sets the scroll for you. And it's a lot better. And we got rid of all our race conditions by placing our init, which gets the client-side data. We put that before the whole page, which means that in the first render, we know that all the information that we need from the client is available on the Redux store. And we put our app did update after, which means that we know all the did component update functions are called after the page is fully rendered and mounted. And that solved a lot of problems for us, and we are expanding these to add more and more functions to the renderless components. And that's it. Thank you.